Welcome to InfoSec Leadership by InfoSec Relations. Today, we are digging into something that landed hard across the security world this past week, a coordinated joint statement from the Five Eyes cybersecurity agencies warning that AI is actually accelerating cyber risk on a timeline of months, not years. So, it's a rare thing for these agencies to speak with one voice like this, and it's a clear signal that something has shifted. So, to unpack what that shift actually looks like on the ground, I'm joined today by Alfredo Hickman, who's a CISO at Kai and previously a CISO at Obsidian Security, where he built that security program from zero. So, Alfredo sits at a genuinely unique vantage point for this conversation. He's securing an AI company's own environment while also building the kind of agentic AI security platform the Five Eyes statement points to as part of the answer. So, Alfredo, thank you so much for joining us today and welcome to InfoSec Relations.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
Great. So, without much delay, let's get into the statement itself. So, when five of the world's most capable cyber defense agencies issue something jointly, that's not noise, that's basically signal, right? I want to dig into what that acceleration actually looks like in practice.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really important to keep in mind that when the Five Eyes, so the United States, Canada, UK, Australia, and New Zealand come together to basically make these sorts of statements, this is transcending politics. This is a joint statement that they use in this forum to really cut through the noise and cut through some of the political posturing and messaging to really warn people that, hey, from this very privileged perspective, in that the capabilities that they possess are unique to that organization, we see an evolution in the risk and in the threat landscape that is really substantial and we are at an inflection point. For us, I think, on the security side of the house, we've known now that this has been coming, right? Even as engineers, even as professional security professionals working on these technologies, what we have seen has been the rapid increase in the maturing, in the development, in the implementation of these technologies. And we know specifically with artificial intelligence, both in generative AI and agentic AI, that this is a capability that will, just as we on the security side are using this to protect and defend and to help support innovation and economic development and so forth, we know that on the nefarious side, threat actors, hackers, and other malicious parties will use the same technologies for malicious purposes, right? To hurt organizations, to hurt people, and so forth. So for the Five Eyes to be able to come together and put out this sort of joint statement is really a wake-up call that transcends any of the local politics of these nations at the time.
Yeah. So, from there, I would like to then ask you said this Five Eyes statement is a signal that AI is moving from future risk to present operational reality, right? So, I would like to then ask what's the most concrete evidence you're seeing in your own environment that backs it up? And do you think the months, not years timeline is accurate, conservative, and or is it alarmist?
I don't think that it's alarmist at all. As a matter of fact, I would say from my perspective, it was a little generous in that we are already seeing AI enabled cyber already happening in the wild, right? So basically
Mhm.
AI, and this is something that I think a lot of us here that are pioneering on the bleeding edge are seeing. These capabilities currently are not developing any novel sorts of cyber attacks. What they are doing, and I know we're going to talk about this a little bit more, is that they are changing the economics of these cyber attacks. They are reducing the barrier to entry. They are accelerating the velocity. They are amplifying the volume, and they are making it much more simple to execute full scale cyber attacks from beginning to end in a much more compressed time cycle than ever before. And that is not a hypothetical. That is not something that is happening in future tense or that could happen in some future tense reality. This is something that is happening now. What the Five Eyes organization is saying is that what we are seeing now, a wave of sophistication, an increase in maturity and complexity and impact of these cyber attacks is the trend line that we're seeing rapidly accelerate.
Right. So when you talk about acceleration, I think my next question to you would then be, so you framed this as attacks becoming cheaper, faster, and more scalable rather than fundamentally new, right?
Correct.
So please could you walk us through what that compression looks like in practice across the attack lifecycle, like reconnaissance, development, social engineering, and where does the disclosure to exploitation window is shrinking the fastest, basically?
Yeah, that's actually a really important question because I think that that gets to the underlying economics of the implications of AI, and the economics
Mhm.
impact everybody. It doesn't matter from the wealthiest governments and nation states and organizations to everything in between. We all have budgets. I spent over a decade of my life in the military and in the defense establishment, working both on counterterrorism and insurgency, and then crossing over into cyber operations and campaigns. And I can tell you that even in the military and in the intelligence community, they all have budgets, right? And what
Right.
AI is doing is it is, as I mentioned before, lowering the barrier of entry, making it easier to expand the resource pool of talent that can actually participate in offensive
Mhm.
cyber campaigns and defensive cyber operations. And not only is it doing it for governments and militaries, but it's doing the same thing for these hacking organizations, these cyber criminal organizations. Whereas before, you had to have highly specialized pools of top talent, and you had to, and those top individuals are very expensive. They're not cheap. Now you can broaden the base of the talent pool that you can work with to accomplish your goals, whether they be nation state goals, economic goals, or they be cyber crime goals. What is happening is that the top most proficient individuals can become even more specialized. They can be leveraged even more strategically, but then it broadens the funnel of resources, of human resources that now can enter the arena of these AI enabled cyber operations, whether they be for good purposes or ill purposes.
Right. So that compression on the attacker side is exactly why your seat is such an interesting one to examine this from. So you're not just defending against the shift, you're saying, you're doing it from an inside of the company that's built on the very technology causing it, right? Uh,
Correct.
that then brings us to our next question. You're a CISO of a company that operates its own agentic AI platform inside its own environment. What's the hardest part of being both the operator and the security owner of that system? And how do you think about the attack surface of AI itself? Like, not just what it defends, but what it actually is.
Yeah, this is why I love this space so much, right? On the edge of
Mhm.
security, of technological innovation, of entrepreneurship. Because as a security executive, as a security leader, I have to look at these technologies for what they are, which is tools, their capabilities, how we leverage these capabilities from a security perspective to enable the business to deliver value to our customers is what ultimately drives the success of our business. However, my responsibility to the business is to protect the organization from the nefarious use of these technologies against us, the double edged sword of this AI technology in this particular case. And it's a really interesting thing because we, as a business executive, have to support the organization to leverage these technologies responsibly, securely, and safely so that we can realize the value. We have to leverage these technologies internally to give us the upper hand to counter the threats. And then we have to constantly be monitoring, assessing, and learning from the external threat landscape so that we can continue to evolve ourselves and to tune ourselves and to make sure that we're as effective as possible. So it is quite a balancing act, but it definitely makes for very fascinating work.
Yeah, so that's actually a very sharp distinction. The attacker surface of AI itself, not just what it protects. So it actually leads into something the statement is quite pointed about, which is what success should actually look like. So then the statement says success will not come from having most of the tools, it'll come from getting the basics right and acting quickly. How do you then think about that alongside building and selling an AI platform?
This is why at Kai we look at cyber defense and from an AI native perspective from first principles. If you go and you speak to the engineers that are developing the frontier models, they will tell you themselves, we don't know where the tech is going to be in the next 12, 24, 36 months because it's evolving so rapidly. So we as defenders have to look at things from foundational principle perspectives, because as much as the external landscape changes, as much as the adversaries are evolving and the technology is evolving, there are certain fundamental principles that will continue to remain true. We must architect and engineer our organizations from resiliency, for resiliency, because attacks will happen, breaches will happen, outages will happen. We must equip our organizations with the resiliency needed to recover. We know that identity, human and non-human identity, is as critical now as it's ever been before. And in AI, it gets even more important. So we must solve for identity. Zero trust, zero trust network architecture. We know that AI is demanding that we implicitly trust all of these agents and systems to connect and move data and make decisions now. The big difference there in agentic AI, to be able to make decisions. Okay, well, how do we put in the ZTNA principles and capabilities so that we start to compartmentalize that trust and verify and put in those guardrails? So there's certain foundational security principles that were critical in the previous generation, but now that are absolutely more critical than ever. And those have not changed. So if we focus on those fundamentals and we apply some of these AI native capabilities and principles to those fundamentals, I think we have a much better chance of succeeding in this new era. And we have to.
Yeah, so getting the basics right and acting quickly is easy to say, definitely, much harder to operationalize,
Much
especially when you're the one accountable for making it happen, right?
correct. Correct. Exactly
But
right.
yeah, but you have actually built that accountability from scratch twice now, right? At Obsidian once and now at Kai. So the next question I would have is then if a CISO came to you today and said, okay, I have 6 months before this AI driven straight curve outspaces my program, what are the 2 or 3 things you'd actually tell him to do first? And what does empowering cyber leaders with authority actually looks like in practice when a board has to choose between, let's say, security investment or growth speed?
Yeah. So there's a number of things. If I had to pick three, I would break it across these different buckets. Training and education of the workforce. It actually really surprises me coming from a military background. In the military, when you're not deployed and working on deployment, you are training and you're training all the time to develop the education, the skills, the proficiency to be excellent in your work. In many organizations in the private sector or in the commercial sector, they tend to not invest in training their people. But now, as technology, as AI is fundamentally disrupting all areas of business, not just in IT, not just in engineering, but AI is impacting all areas of business, manufacturing and HR and finance and every area that you can imagine is being impacted by AI. We must
Right.
educate and train our workforce, our labor force, to be able to leverage these capabilities effectively, efficiently, and securely and safely. We must do that. The second thing that we must do is we must retool our organizations for the time, just in the same way as when there's been previous major economic evolutions. from agrarian economy to industrial economy to information economy. All of these major evolutions in economics and industry required retooling to match the times. We must retool our organizations to match the times. From a security perspective, that means putting in the purpose built capabilities and technologies that are developed to harness these capabilities effectively and efficiently and deliver against those use cases, because the previous generation of tooling was built for a very different era, and we are in a new era now. And the third thing is absolute engagement and communication with the critical stakeholders throughout our organization. From a security
Right.
perspective, security emerging from a technical discipline, integrating horizontally across an organization and touching every aspect of the business, we have to be able to partner with, effectively communicate, and work with all of the critical stakeholders in our group. In the military, we call this by, with, and through, because everything we do is by, with, and through our partners from all areas of the business. And that not only includes
Mhm.
our peers, but also our leadership, right? And our boards of
Right.
directors as well. Because if we can bring them on board and have them align with our vision of a secure, viable organization, then we will be far more successful for sure.
Yeah, right. But that tension between authority and resourcing is exactly where this becomes like a board conversation rather than just a security team conversation, right?
That's actually a critical point that we should address. One of the
Mhm.
really fascinating things to me as I'm engaging in the various boards that I participate in is that this is one of the very rare times, at least in my lifetime, where I've seen boards of directors that have been
Mhm.
very active and engaging in their organizations investing and procuring these technologies. Typically, boards of directors are not as engaged in technical technology decisions for their organizations. But this is one of the rare times where you're hearing from the boards themselves. What are we doing in terms of investment in AI? How quickly are we getting these technologies in our organizations? And now they're seeing, and many of these boards are understanding, these technologies have the capabilities to make decisions on behalf of the organizations that have material risk implications. So now the boards are coming to us and saying, hey, we really care. We want to realize the value from these investments, but we also understand that this is very different and security and safety are paramount. How can we support
Mhm.
you? We must continue to drive those conversations so that investment in technology is also matched with the investment in security so that we can enable the organization to realize that value for the long run safely.
Right. So the statement kind of then frames cyber resilience as a board issue, not an IT issue. And from what you have shared now, I think boards are not actually hearing that yet. And is it still landing as a technical memo to most of them? Is that correct?
So for many boards, it is landing as purely a technical issue. I think,
Yeah.
unfortunately, human psychology is very much wired towards it's wired in a way that makes safety and security sometimes an afterthought until individuals themselves are presented with some sort of significant incident and they experience it for themselves. Then it tends to become quite real. Some boards are very different. Some boards really understand that this is a whole of business issue, that there's emerging regulatory implications now as the EU AI Act with 11% of budget fines and so forth and
Mm.
so on. Some boards are much more progressive and forward leaning. Some are not quite there yet. And they might have to wait until they have their big incident in order to wake up.
Yeah. It's actually encouraging to hear the boards are starting to absorb this as a business risk rather than a technical one. But flipping the lens for a moment, because the statement is just as clear that AI isn't only a problem for defenders, it's also one for the most powerful tools they have. I think my next question would be then Five Eyes draws a distinction. between using AI to strengthen defense versus simply improving efficiency. Where have you seen then AI driven defense actually outperform a skilled human analyst? And where have you maybe seen it confidently get something wrong in a way that mattered?
This is, I think you allude to a very good point, is that we're still in the
Mm.
very early times when it comes to AI and its effectiveness, right? I
Yeah.
think you're probably alluding to some of the hallucinations and probably some of the experiences that we've all had leveraging some of these technologies where you can interact with the technologies, you can question the technologies, and sometimes they will return an output to you that they present to you
Yeah.
as absolute fact, and then it turns out that they just completely made it up. this
Yeah,
this is
that's right.
yeah,
Yeah.
this is one of the things. Okay, so for me, the development of the internet and the search engine and the digitization of much of the world's knowledge to where we could query it at our fingertips, right? This was a fantastic evolutionary capability in technology. It leveraged so much learning and knowledge and so forth. But fundamentally, we still had to read and process this information. We had to make sense of it and extract knowledge from this data and this information. With generative
Mm.
AI in particular, we now have a technology that not only can query much of the world's data and information, but it will also do the thinking for you. And that has
Mm.
very significant implications if we do not have quality assurance checks in this data to make sure that the data that we are consuming is not biased, is not intentionally poisoned, as we've seen with some of the Chinese models, where if you ask them questions about certain pieces of history, they will intentionally return to you data that is misleading and so forth, right? And then conversely, from a business and commerce perspective, if we are looking to take action on that data as humans, let alone as
Mhm.
agents, we have to make sure that we have those quality assurance checks to make sure that the data is good and that the information is
Mm.
good and hasn't been intentionally manipulated or poisoned or is incorrect incidentally, because there's going to be very real implications. And we've seen these implications before. We've read about them in the news. We've seen cases, in finance where organizations have made large investments with information that has been generated by AI. And then it turns out that the information was completely wrong. So we must not check our brains, as it were. We must exercise critical thought. And from an organizational enterprise implications perspective, we have to develop the quality assurance and the quality check fabric to make sure that the data and the information that we are using to fuel decisions, whether they are human decisions or they're autonomous decisions, we have to make sure we do that.
So, as we wrap, I want to zoom out from the day to day and think about where this actually leads. And I have two questions for you there. So, my first question would then be, if the statement holds and the timeline is really months, as we spoke about, what does the cybersecurity industry then looks like in a year from now that it doesn't look like today?
Yeah. So, as I mentioned at the beginning, I actually think the statement from the Five Eyes was quite generous. I don't think we're talking about months. I think we're seeing some of these sophisticated kill chains, some of these sophisticated operations and orchestrated operations already happening now, right? So for
Right.
us as defenders, as security leaders and executives, this is something that we have to start dealing with today. Very few organizations in the world are in a relatively mature position when it comes to their AI native security strategy. Most
Hmm.
organizations are somewhere from having not started to just starting or barely really starting to get traction. So, no matter where we are in our journey, we really need to assess our organizations. What kind of business are we engaged with? Our verticals? What are the material risk implications presented by the rapid discovery of vulnerabilities, the rapid exploitation of these vulnerabilities, the supply chain implications, because the supply chain is absolutely critical. And how do we start to enable our organizations via training and education, via investment in retooling for AI native capabilities across the board, and of the governance in terms of process and policy, so that we can do two things: securely enable the investments of our business to leverage these capabilities, and then to defend our organizations and that value from those AI native threats that are happening today, and will only continue to evolve tomorrow.
Right. So these are several factors that kind of hint towards proactiveness in different domains, right? To defend the organization. But what is that one thing you wish more CISOs would understand right now that they don't yet?
Yeah. So the thing that I wish more CISOs understood that they don't yet is that this is not, once again, many CISOs. I'll give you a practical example. I'll share
Please.
with you a story. So I was on a call in a very prominent CISO forum, and there was almost 100 CISOs from around the world representing many different industries, from government, manufacturing, education, healthcare, sciences, energy. All industries were represented here. And it was
Mhm.
almost halfway split. About half of the security leaders here were like, hey, this is inevitable. This is coming. We need to be proactive. We need to start really assessing our organizations and getting the investments in place and starting to enable the companies and so forth. And about half the other group was like, we are going to try to delay this as much as possible. I still have a lengthy backlog of things that we haven't worked. This is just a fad. It's not catching on, so forth and so on. And the only historical parallel in my lifetime that is similar to this is that reminds me of when the internet first started to really take off and really gain traction. Many people were like, hey, this is just a fad. It's going to blow over. It's not going to have global systemic implications. And about the other half was like, no, this is going to change the world. By the mid 1990s, and definitely by the late 1990s, nobody was asking these questions anymore because the entire world had changed. We are in a very similar historical parallel right now where this the world has changed and it is changing. And for those that can see it, it's obvious. And for those that yet can't see it, we will come to a time in the not too distant future where even they will not be able to ignore it. So we must proactively move to put our organizations in position to succeed safely in this new era because we are there.
So, Alfredo, this has been genuinely a useful conversation, not just on what the Five Eyes statement says, but on what it actually means for the people accountable for acting on it. So, thank you for being so direct about where the real risks are and for bringing both sides of this, defending AI companies and also like building AI defense into the conversation. So that's all the questions we have for you today. To our listeners, if this conversation has been useful to you as it has been to me, please do follow InfoSec Relations and share it with someone in your network who's wrestling with the same questions. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you again next time. Thank you again, Alfredo.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.